Virginia's governor just signed a law that makes your vote for president irrelevant, and almost nobody is talking about it. On April 13th, Governor Spanberger quietly signed HB 965, a bill that joins Virginia to something called the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact. Here's what that actually means. If Virginia votes one way for president, but the rest of the country goes the other direction, Virginia's electoral votes go with the country, not with who you voted for. Now, the framing they're selling is every vote matters equally, which sounds great, but here's what they're not telling you. The Electoral College wasn't broken, it was designed specifically to make sure that rural states, small states, and communities outside of major cities still had a voice in who becomes president. Under this compact, presidential campaigns would have zero reason to care about Virginia outside of Richmond and Northern Virginia. I mean, why would they? You just hand your votes to wherever New York and California go. Some legal scholars have argued the framers of the Constitution explicitly rejected the idea of popular elections for president, and that changing the system requires a constitutional amendment, not a state-level workaround. And here's the part that should bother everyone regardless of party. As of March 2026, every single governor who has signed this compact into law has been a Democrat, not one Republican. This wasn't bipartisan reform, this was a party using a legislative shortcut to restructure how presidents get elected without touching the Constitution. We are a republic, not a pure democracy. That distinction matters because pure democracies let 51% of the country permanently ignore the other 49%. Virginia just took a step toward erasing its own voice in national elections, and they did it while nobody was watching.
Let's be real for a second. Something about this situation in Virginia just doesn't sit right. And people are starting to notice. We're talking about Governor Abigail Spanberger, who campaigned as a moderate, someone who is supposed to be reasonable, balanced, and willing to work in the middle. But what we're seeing right now looks very different from that image. In my view, this is exactly the kind of shift voters worry about when they hear that moderate label during an election, because once in office, the policies start to tell a different story. And I think this should get the attention of anyone thinking about upcoming elections, whether that's the midterms or even 2028, because the question becomes, what does moderate actually mean anymore? Here's what this actually looks like in real life. Voters pick someone expecting one approach, and then the decisions coming out of the governor's office feel a lot more one-sided than advertised. And the latest move is a perfect example of why people are frustrated. We're talking about a bill that would change how Virginia's electoral votes are allocated, shifting them towards the national popular vote instead of what voters in Virginia actually decide. Think about that for a second. That means that people in the state could vote one way, but the outcome could still go the other direction based on what happens across the entire country. From my perspective, that raises serious questions about representation and whether voters in that state are really having their voices heard the way they expect. And this is where people start saying something feels off, like the rules are being adjusted in a way that benefits one side long term. So the big question becomes, is this about fairness or is this about control? Hit the like button, share the video, subscribe to the channel, and check this out.
There's a potential shift in how America elects its president. The Commonwealth has joined a growing push to award electoral votes based on the national popular vote. ABC 13's Rachel Branding joins us now live from the Lynchburg Registrar's office tonight with a look at what this means for you and your vote.
Pat, with Governor Spanberger's signing, Virginia is now the 18th state, plus Washington, D.C., to join the National Popular Vote Compact. That push is gaining some major momentum, and it's getting closer to a tipping point, but not without serious debate. Virginia's entrance into the agreement brings the total electoral votes to 222.
Every state that says yes, that means we're closer to that magic 270 votes that it takes to win the presidency.
The compact would award a state's electoral votes to the candidate who wins the national popular vote, no matter how that candidate performed in the state itself.
Depending upon the state you live in, your vote does count differently.
Right now, Virginia's 13 electoral votes go to the candidate who wins the state. This plan would shift that power to the national stage.
Are there any concerns of it diluting Virginia voters?
I think not. I generally think the president should be the person that wins the popular vote. And the framers of the Constitution established the Electoral College, which allocates a certain number of electors to each state. But they didn't put in the Constitution how states should decide how those electors cast their ballots.
Though some say the plan could clash with the Constitution.
As long as we have it in the Constitution that there's an Electoral College, we really should be following that procedure. I think to try to change it by sort of pretending it doesn't exist is not really the right way to go about it.
I took that to former U.S. Attorney for the Western District, John Fishwick.
How does this work constitutionally?
I think it would be subject to a serious constitutional challenge. I think this National Popular Vote Compact, what really is inconsistent with the United States Constitution, which says, each state will elect electors according basically to the voted within that state.
With states taking different approaches, he says that could create real problems.
I don't think you can have that sort of inconsistency picking a president of the United States.
The compact only goes into effect if it reaches 270 electoral votes, with Virginia now on board. Supporters say momentum is growing, but opponents say that a court challenge could ultimately decide its future. Reporting.
There you have it, family. So let's break this down in a real world example, right? Now that you guys heard that. A real world way, because this is where people start to feel like something isn't adding up. At the most basic level, if you're elected to represent a state, your job is to represent the people in that state. It's that simple. Your responsibility is to your voters first, not your party. So if the people in your state lean one way, your job is to reflect that. That's how representation is supposed to work. Now, here's where this situation starts to feel off. What this policy is saying in plain English is that the outcome of the presidential vote in Virginia could be overwritten by what happens in the rest of the country. Think about that for a second. Imagine people in Virginia go out, they vote one way. They think their state is going in that direction. And then the final result ignores that because of the national popular vote. From my perspective, that's where frustration comes in, because now voters are asking, wait, what was the point of my vote here? And this only makes sense politically if you believe your side is going to benefit from that system most of the time. That's the part people don't always say out loud. Over the past couple of decades, Democrats have genuinely performed better in the national popular vote, especially because of large population centers like New York City, Los Angeles, Chicago, and places like that. So if elections shift more towards the national vote, those areas start to carry a lot of more weight. Meanwhile, smaller states or even swing states lose some of that influence they normally have under the Electoral College. And here's what that looks like in real life. Campaigns would spend even more time focusing on big metro areas because that's where the most of the votes are. Meanwhile, voters in less populated regions can feel like they matter less in the overall outcome. That's the concern driving a lot of this debate. Now, on the other side, supporters of this idea argue that every individual vote should count equally, no matter where you live, and that the national popular vote reflects the will of the people more directly. That's their argument. But critics look at this and say it creates a different kind of imbalance, where a handful of dense cities end up having outsized influence over the entire country. And when you connect that back to what's happening into Virginia, the concern becomes even more specific. If enough states adopt this system and it reaches that 270 electoral vote threshold, then yes, this would effectively change how presidential elections are decided without formally amending the Constitution. That's why people are paying attention now, even if it hasn't fully taken effect yet, because once it does, there's no partial version of this. It's a complete shift. And from my perspective, that's why this debate isn't just about one state. It's about how elections work across the entire country, and whether voters feel like their voice is still tied to where they live, or if it gets absorbed into a much bigger national outcome. Let's be real. This is where a lot of people start to question what's really going on, because when you look at policy like this, it doesn't feel like it's about giving voters more of a voice. It feels like it's changing the system in a way that benefits one side. And from my perspective, that's why people are frustrated. The message it sends is pretty simple. If the outcome in your state doesn't line up with the national result, meaning a popular vote, and which is basically the vote that the rest of the country ultimately decides. So say, for example, your state votes Republican or you vote Republican. And most of the individuals in that state in Virginia overall, based on all of the votes, the Republican wins. But if the national vote, which is the popular vote in the entire country, says the Democrat is winning by a couple 100,000 more votes, then forget what Virginia said about voting Republican. You're automatically voting Democrat because the popular vote in the rest of the country, just by 100,000 votes extra more from that Democrat candidate, presidential wise. Oh, well, guess what? Your vote is Democrat. We're changing it because that's what the popular vote says. So it basically says, forget your vote in a way. This is how people feel. That's why I showed you guys the clip in the beginning. Forget your vote. And instead of you being a Virginian and letting the state overall earn the vote of the president, oh, if the rest of the country goes, you goes, and we don't care how you vote. Even if your state votes different, the rest of the country went this way, so you're going to blow that way. So if the wind blows right and you decide to go left, well, all of the wind is blowing right predominantly, so you're going to have to blow right with it. Right? And that's the message it sends. It's pretty simple, right? That's why I'm saying, breaking down simplistically, if the outcome in your state doesn't line up with the national result, then your state's decision could basically be set aside. Think about what that looks like. You got people who show up, they vote, they follow the process, and then they're told that their state's outcome doesn't carry the weight they thought they did. So, oh, we have Republican. Our state did earn a presidential candidate to be a Republican person, but since the rest of the country and pick Democrat, and then the Democrat is winning by 100,000 votes, forget that we voted Republican. So it also raises the question, did the president actually earn? It takes away the voice in a way, and this is why individuals are frustrated because they don't feel like their vote actually got earned because they just going with everybody else. Instead of you being the leader of your voice, you're basically being a follower of other voices. You get what I'm saying, family? And that's where trust starts to break down. Now, to be fair, there have always been debates about how elections should work in this country. There have been changes over time, and there are arguments on both sides about what's more fair or more representative. Some people genuinely believe a national popular vote is the most direct form of democracy. That's a real argument. But the concern here is, how is this being done and what it leads to? Because this isn't a small adjustment, it's a fundamental shift in how presidential elections are decided. And it's happening at the state level instead of through a constitutional amendment. And that's the part that raises eyebrows, you know? And when you zoom out, this is why people keep coming back to the same question. Is this about improving the system, or is it about securing long-term political advantage? In my view, it starts to look a lot like the second one. Because when the rules are changed in a way that consistently benefits one outcome, people are going to notice that. And once that trust is gone, it's hard to get back. At the end of the day, this isn't just about Virginia. It's about whether voters feel like their voice actually matters where they live, or rather it gets overridden by a much bigger national calculation. That's a serious conversation. And it's one that's not going away anytime soon. So let me know what you guys think in the comments. If you want more breakdowns like this, make sure you like, share, and subscribe. Catch you in the next one. Spread that peace, love, and positivity. On that note, family, peace.